Can a human being truly survive without food for more than a year? At first, this sounds like an impossible riddle. Most of us start feeling weak if we skip just one meal. Some people attempt short fasts for health or spiritual reasons, but usually we're talking about hours or days, not months. Yet, there was one man who defied every expectation. Under strict medical supervision, he went 382 days without eating a single bite of food. No snacks, no meals, not even a piece of bread. And the most unbelievable part? He not only survived, but transformed his life completely. This is not a myth or an exaggerated story. His case was carefully documented by doctors, making it one of the most astonishing experiments in medical history. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the story of that man. Who he was, how he managed to survive, what happened to his body and mind, and why this strange event still fascinates scientists and ordinary people today. Our story begins in the 1960s, in Scotland. The man at the center of this incredible journey was named Angus Barbieri. At the time, he was only in his mid-20s, but his life was already overshadowed by a serious problem: extreme obesity. Angus weighed about 456 pounds. That's over 200 kilograms. He struggled with his health, his mobility, and even his daily life routines. Doctors were worried. He was at risk for diabetes, heart disease, and countless other complications. Back then, the medical world didn't have the modern weight loss surgeries or medications we hear about today. Options were limited, and Angus desperately wanted a change. It was in this moment of desperation that Angus made a radical decision. He told his doctors he was ready to attempt something drastic, a prolonged fast. No solid food at all, just water, supplements, and medical supervision. At first, the medical team at the University of Dundee thought he would last maybe a few days, perhaps a week at most. But Angus had something they didn't expect: a fierce determination. He wasn't satisfied with losing just a little weight. He wanted to keep going until he reached what he considered a normal body size. What started as a short medical experiment soon turned into the longest fast in recorded history. When Angus first suggested the idea of a total fast, most doctors would have laughed or dismissed it as too dangerous. But his case was different. He was young, extremely overweight, and determined to lose the pounds no matter what. His body carried massive fat reserves, which theoretically could fuel him for an extended period. The medical team at the University of Dundee realized this could be a rare chance to observe what happens when the human body lives entirely off its own fat stores. They agreed to supervise Angus, but only under strict conditions. He would be admitted to the hospital for the beginning of the fast. He'd receive regular checkups, blood tests, and constant monitoring. And though he would not consume solid food, the doctors gave him water, tea, black coffee, and vitamin supplements. From time to time, they also added minerals like potassium and sodium to keep his body balanced. At first, they didn't plan for this to last long. A week, maybe two, before his body would demand food again. But to their astonishment, Angus kept going. His energy remained steady, and his body adapted in ways the doctors hadn't fully predicted. What started as a simple clinical observation was quickly turning into a groundbreaking study, and the medical team decided to follow the journey, step by step. At the beginning, the fast was tough. Angus felt hungry, restless, and his body had to adjust to the sudden absence of food. But remarkably, after the first few days, something surprising happened. His hunger almost completely disappeared. His body had shifted into a state known as ketosis, where it began burning stored fat as its primary source of energy. Weeks turned into months. Each day, Angus drank water, tea, or black coffee, and took his prescribed vitamins and minerals. Nothing else. No bread, no fruit, no soup, nothing. His body slowly consumed its own fat reserves, and with each passing week, the number on the scale dropped dramatically. Doctors tracked the process carefully. Blood sugar levels, blood pressure, and other vital signs were monitored. Despite expectations, Angus remained in surprisingly good health. He wasn't bedridden or weak all the time. In fact, he was able to walk, interact, and even continued with normal activities. The fast stretched past 1 month, then 2, then 6. By that point, what had begun as a short attempt had turned into a phenomenon. Newspapers reported on his progress. People whispered about the man who doesn't eat, and doctors were astonished to see how far the experiment could go. And still, Angus pressed on. He wanted to reach his goal weight, no matter how long it would take. Over the course of his 382 days without food, Angus went through an extraordinary physical transformation. When he began, he weighed around 456 pounds. By the end, he had dropped to just 180 pounds, a total loss of nearly 300 pounds. It was one of the most dramatic weight reductions ever recorded in medical history. But what about his health during this time? Surprisingly, Angus tolerated the fast much better than anyone had expected. His body, fueled by fat reserves, adapted to the lack of food. Routine tests showed stable blood sugar levels, and his vital signs remained within a safe range. Doctors noted that his body seemed to handle the transition remarkably well. Of course, there were difficulties. Angus sometimes felt weak and lightheaded, and he occasionally experienced fatigue. But these episodes were not constant, and he often reported feeling surprisingly well for someone who hadn't eaten in months. The psychological side was equally fascinating. Many people would crumble under the mental stress of such a fast, but Angus displayed unusual determination. He was patient, disciplined, and laser-focused on his goal. Friends and doctors described him as calm and motivated, even when faced with the endless monotony of consuming nothing but water, tea, and supplements. This balance between physical resilience and psychological willpower was what allowed Angus to continue when most people would have given up after a single week. As the months rolled by, Angus endured a remarkable transformation, one that pushed both his body and mind to the very limits of human endurance. But while the medical charts told one story of steady weight loss and stable vital signs, the daily reality was far more complex. The first week was the hardest. Angus's body, accustomed to heavy meals, fought back. He felt waves of intense hunger that gnawed at him day and night, making him restless and irritable. His stomach cramped, his thoughts circled endlessly around food, and the smell of meals around him felt like torture. Yet, as his body shifted into ketosis, something unexpected happened. The constant hunger faded. His system began feeding on his own fat reserves, and in place of the sharp pangs of hunger came a strange steadiness. But steadiness did not mean ease. Angus still faced daily challenges. Without food, his digestion slowed dramatically. Constipation became a recurring problem, and doctors had to intervene with remedies to keep his system functioning. His energy was unpredictable. Some mornings he woke up with enough strength to walk around, even chat cheerfully with his doctors. On other days, dizziness and weakness forced him to rest in bed. Standing too quickly could leave him lightheaded, and the absence of nutrients meant that his body needed careful supplementation. Doctors supplied extra potassium and sodium at times to protect his heart from dangerous irregularities. Physically, his appearance changed before everyone's eyes. The once 456-pound man shrank, week by week. His skin began to sag, draping loosely where fat had melted away. Muscle mass thinned, his face hollowed, and yet there was a spark of determination in his eyes that never seemed to dim. The psychological battle was even more grueling. Food is not just survival. It is culture, comfort, and connection. For over a year, Angus had to sit through family dinners, surrounded by the smell of fried foods, bread, and steaming meals, without taking a single bite. The temptation was relentless. Each day he returned to the same monotony: water, tea, black coffee, and a handful of vitamins. The lack of variety, the absence of simple pleasures, weighed heavily on him. Socially, he was isolated. Shared meals and celebrations passed him by. Friends gathered over food, while he sat apart, sipping tea. At times, this loneliness pressed on him more than the physical hunger. There were moments of fatigue, moments of quiet withdrawal. Yet, He clung to his goal with unwavering focus. He wanted not just to lose weight, but to reclaim his life. And so he pressed forward. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then into a full year. By the time Angus finally broke his fast, after an astonishing 382 days without food, he was no longer the man who had walked into the hospital at over 200 kilograms. He stepped on the scale at 180 pounds, nearly 300 pounds lighter. His first proper meal after more than a year was breakfast, a boiled egg, a slice of bread with butter, and a cup of coffee. It was a modest plate, but for Angus, it was a feast. His body had survived the impossible, and now it was time to eat again. Doctors who monitored him were stunned. Not only had he survived the ordeal, but his health at the end of the fast was stable. Blood sugar, blood pressure, and organ function were all within safe ranges. It was, and still is, one of the most extraordinary cases in the history of medicine. For Angus, the fast wasn't just about losing weight. It was about regaining freedom, the ability to move, to live, and to exist without the crushing weight of his former body. And though his story remains unique, it also serves as a stark reminder. What he endured was extreme, dangerous, and not something anyone should attempt without medical necessity and strict supervision. Yet, his determination and resilience left behind a record that has never been broken and likely never will. When Angus finally ended his 382-day fast, many wondered what would come next. Would his body rebound? Would he gain all the weight back? Or would he finally enjoy the normal, healthy life he had fought so hard to achieve? For Angus, the end of the fast marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter. His first meal, a boiled egg, buttered bread, and a cup of coffee, was more than food. It was a celebration, a symbol of survival. After more than a year of denying himself, he was able to taste again, and yet he approached food with a completely different mindset. Doctors followed his progress closely in the months that came after. To their surprise, Angus did not immediately regain the weight. In fact, he managed to maintain a much healthier figure for several years. This was extraordinary, since many people who undergo rapid weight loss quickly return to their old habits. Angus seemed determined not to let that happen. He lived a relatively quiet life after the fast. He worked at his family's fish and chip shop for a time and eventually moved to England. People who met him later described him as ordinary and humble, not a man seeking fame, but someone who had once done something extraordinary and then returned to everyday living. Still, the shadow of his fast never left him. His case was written about in medical journals, referenced by doctors, and debated by scientists who were fascinated by the limits of the human body. For Angus, though, it was less about history and more about personal freedom. The fast had given him back his mobility, his health, and his sense of self. Of course, the story did not have a fairy tale ending. Angus lived into his late 50s, passing away in 1990. His life after the fast was not free of health struggles, but he never returned to the extreme obesity of his youth. More importantly, his name remains forever tied to a record that still stands today, the longest medically supervised fast in history. His journey left behind lessons for medicine and for anyone who has ever struggled with their body. It showed the power of human determination, but also the risks of pushing the body to extremes. Modern doctors do not recommend such fasting today. It is simply too dangerous. But Angus Barbieri's story continues to captivate because it reveals just how far a human being can go when faced with desperation, discipline, and the will to change. When the news of Angus Barbieri's fast spread, it captured worldwide attention. People were astonished, skeptical, and sometimes even outraged. After all, how could a man survive for more than a year without eating? Some believed it was a hoax. Others feared that his story would inspire reckless imitations. In Scotland, Angus briefly became a local celebrity. Newspapers reported on his progress, sometimes with amazement, sometimes with a tone of disbelief. Headlines called him the man who didn't eat for a year. His story traveled far beyond Dundee, reaching readers and doctors across Europe and America. In the medical community, the reaction was more cautious. On the one hand, doctors were fascinated. His case was carefully documented and published in a respected medical journal in 1973. The data gave researchers a rare, detailed look at how the human body behaves during prolonged starvation, information that had never before been available in such depth. Angus's survival challenged assumptions about metabolism, fat reserves, and the limits of fasting. But on the other hand, many experts issued warnings. They emphasized that Angus's fast was an extreme and dangerous exception, not a model for treatment. Without the careful monitoring, the supplements, and Angus's unusual willpower, such a feat would almost certainly have been fatal. Some scientists worried that sensational headlines could encourage others to attempt dangerous, unsupervised fasts. Among the public, the reaction was mixed. Some admired his discipline and saw him as proof that radical transformation was possible. Others criticized the experiment, believing it was irresponsible of doctors to allow a man to go so long without food. Still, the fascination endured. Angus's story sparked debates about obesity, medical ethics, and the resilience of the human body. Today, decades later, Angus Barbieri's fast remains one of the most cited cases in the history of medical science. No one has officially broken his record. And even in an age of modern diets and weight loss surgeries, his name continues to appear whenever the subject of extreme fasting is raised. His story was not just about one man's struggle with obesity. It became a window into human biology and a reminder of how science and society grapple with the extraordinary. Angus Barbieri's story is astonishing not just because of the numbers, 382 days, nearly 300 pounds lost, but because of what it reveals about human resilience, determination, and the limits of the body. He survived what no ordinary person could imagine, guided every step of the way by medical supervision, discipline, and sheer willpower. Yet, his journey is also a cautionary tale. It reminds us that extreme measures carry extreme risks. What Angus achieved was unique, and attempting such a fast without supervision could be deadly. His story is not a blueprint. It is a remarkable chapter in the history of medicine and human endurance. Beyond the science, there is a human story at its heart. Angus wanted freedom from the physical and emotional burden of extreme obesity. He sought control over his body and his life, and in doing so, he pushed himself to the unimaginable. The fast became more than weight loss. It became a testament to human focus, resilience, and courage. Today, decades later, Angus Barbieri's record still stands, and his story continues to inspire curiosity and awe. It challenges us to consider the limits of our bodies and minds, while reminding us to respect the fragile balance that keeps us alive. In the end, Angus Barbieri didn't just survive. He transformed, not only physically, but in the way we remember what human beings are capable of. His story is unforgettable, extreme, and ultimately, a profound exploration of human determination.